All right, guys, we're going to wrap up day 4 of our first week with order of operations. This should look pretty familiar. This is an acronym to help us remember the order in which we would simplify an expression. Might know it as please excuse my dear Aunt Sally or just PEMDAS. It's become pretty popular as just PEMDAS. People don't really know and use please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, I think, as much. Maybe when you're younger that helps. But we really know the P stands for parentheses. The E stands for exponents. The M stands for multiplication. The D stands for division. A stands for addition. S stands for subtraction. But we also know that, hey, we would go in this order. We would look inside parentheses to see what we would do first. Then we would move to exponents. If there were no parentheses, we would go to exponents first, simplify the exponents. Multiplication and division, we could switch those. We're going to do whatever comes first as we go from left to right. So sometimes division will be done before multiplication. Sometimes multiplication will be done before division. It all depends on what comes first as you look at the problem. So sometimes D does come before M, just like addition and subtraction. Sometimes subtraction will come before addition. It's all what comes first. However, addition and subtraction always comes after multiplication and division. Okay, and this is how we would begin to work through and simplify an expression. Okay, and this is important because we actually go in the opposite direction when we begin to solve equations. And that's really a helpful rule of thumb as we start to solve equations. When we're simplifying, we go in this direction. We go from left to right, P to S, okay? And that's what we're going to be doing here. A couple important tips, guys, that I really want to show you guys going into high school because I think this is good and this will be helpful, okay? Negative 4 squared and the quantity negative 4 squared, these are not the same result. These are different. Okay, so if we let's look at this first one, negative 4 squared. So that's saying we're taking negative 4 and we're going to multiply it by itself 2 times. So really what this is equal to is negative 4 times negative 4. And even though we haven't covered this, I think you've seen this because it was in one of our, I think, quizzes. A negative divided by a negative or a negative multiplied by a negative is a positive. Okay, and a positive times a negative or a negative times a positive is a negative. So that's how we get our negative result. But we know here negative 4 times a negative 4 is 16. This is saying here we're going to actually square 4. This negative, and I know I said this yesterday, and this is important just note this with the exponents. This is just with exponents. This square is only connected to the 4, not the negative 4. Okay, so actually the way we would read this is with the negative outside. So we would square the 4 first, so 4 times 4 is 16, and then that negative out front makes it a negative 16. Okay, and that's really important if you're using a calculator so that you know parentheses really do make a big difference. Here it would be negative 4 times itself twice. Here it would be 4 times itself, and then the negative comes into play. Okay, that's super important. The other thing I wanted to show you is with fractions and a negative fraction, there's a few different ways of writing this. This negative 1/2, that negative can be written out front like it is here. That's also equal to negative 1/2, so we could put the negative up top. That's also equal to 1/2. We could put the negative down below. So with a negative fraction, you kind of have some options depending on how you want to deal with that. Okay, you can move it around, but what you can't do, what it's not equal to, is -1/2, because -1 over -2, a negative divided by a negative is a positive, and 1/2 is clearly not equal to -1/2. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind there. One last important tip. A lot of times, some people will use double parentheses, so they'll use parentheses inside parentheses. Okay, so you always start with the innermost parentheses when we're talking about PEMDAS up here. We always start with the innermost, but really technically what they should be using is brackets on the outside. So instead of using double parentheses, a lot of times brackets are going to be used, and brackets act just like parentheses. So we're going to go inside the brackets. If we have parentheses inside there, we're going to go inside and work with that first, okay? So let's just look at a couple examples, okay? Number one, using order of operations, we're going to first go to what's inside the parentheses, and this says 7 plus 4, which we know is 11. So I'm going to bring down the 5. I'm keeping the 11 inside the parentheses. And now I have the operations I'm looking at are multiplication, because there's nothing in between these two numbers, subtraction, and another multiplication symbol. Keep in mind, multiplication can be shown a couple different ways with parentheses, raised dots, x, but the x we use less and less as we get into algebra. Okay, so now we're going to do multiplication because m comes before s. So I've got 5 times 11, which is 55, and then I have our minus, and I could do 8 times 4, which is 32. 55 minus 32 is going to be 23. And that is our final answer. So notice we took something that's big, we made it small, and we followed the order of operations. Okay, if we didn't, we'd all get a different answer. Could be simplified, but it wouldn't be correct. Okay, and that's why we have order of operations. So here's an example of where we have some brackets. So we're going to go inside the brackets, and then we have a couple sets of parentheses. Well, here there's nothing really to do here. We just have a number. But in here, it is telling us to do something. We're going to take 5 and add 14, which is 19. So I'm going to bring that down. I have 19 minus 2 times 7. And I'm going to keep my brackets since I still have parentheses here. 2 times 7. Now we could look at this as -2 times 7, like we talked about yesterday, which would be -14. This would become 5, and now I'm going to go back to parentheses, 19 minus 14, okay? And now we have 19 minus 14, which is 5, and we're going to keep that in the parentheses. And 5 times 5 would be 25. So now I'm going to come to the side a little bit here. Okay, so notice none of these really have positive or negative numbers. When we begin to work through our worksheets and quizzes, we're going to have positive and negative numbers. I have to keep it real. I have to keep it a little bit more challenging for you guys, since this is a little bit more of an advanced group. And I hope you guys are okay with that, but that's what you'll end up seeing. Okay, one last one that I want to show you was when we have something that looks like a fraction. We know that this big bar means division. We're going to keep it like this. But if you see this big bar, that automatically means there's grouping symbols up here, up above, and there's grouping symbols down below. Okay, that's what that big bar means. So now that we have those, that kind of changes the game a little bit. Okay, we are going to go inside the parentheses, which is 72 plus 12, which would be 84 up top, and down below we're going to go inside the parentheses. I have 35 plus 7, which is 42, and now we're going to do division last, which is 84 divided by 42, which is 2. Okay, so that's kind of interesting, a little bit of a game changer there. We do follow the order of operations. Even though there aren't parentheses there, they're assumed to be there. So I write them in as soon as I see that big bar. I write them in around the top, and I write them in around the bottom. And of course, if there were already parentheses up top, I would have used brackets. I would have bracketed the top, and then whatever is on the bottom, I would do the same. Okay? All right, so hopefully that's helpful. I'm kind of cramming a lot of stuff in here. I'm trying to hit some important tips. Those tips are huge. Okay, and I don't know how many of you knew that, but that should be super helpful going into high school. We're going to do some challenging problems here. They're going to take a little bit more time than usual because these have a lot of steps. All right, it's all about accuracy. I know you've seen PEMDAS, probably seen PEMDAS since 4th grade, but they keep getting harder and harder and harder with the use of exponents and fractions and positive and negative numbers. So take your time. All right, it's all about accuracy. Again, this is no racing. Sometimes we will have little races like we did yesterday, and let's see how you do, okay?